Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Parks and Restoration Podcast, the show for parks and conservation professionals and pretty much anybody that's associated with parks and conservation that wants to be better leaders. That's what this show is all about, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I am Chris Lee, your host, coming to you from the east coast of Iowa, where we had a really nice break in the weather, and then it got blustery cold again. It is blowing 25 miles an hour and freaking cold out there, and it's really hard for me not to book a trip to Puerto Rico. They've got some really inexpensive Airbnbs down there, and I'm kind of having a hard time saying no, but I don't know. We'll see.
And I'm Jeremy Yost, your West Coaster over here in Western Iowa. I'm part of the Natural Areas Management team here in Pot County Conservation. And we just had 8 inches of snow. We finally got that white Christmas here at the end of February.
Yeah, well, I don't envy you. We did not get any of that. You can have it. You can keep it.
If you needed more reason to go to Puerto Rico, there's a bunch of snow in Iowa.
Right? Man, it's just, spring is not coming soon enough. All right. Today, we are talking about leadership lessons from prescribed burns. And we've got prescribed burn season coming up. It's as much as it still feels like winter, spring is just right around the corner. We're a month away from the technical calendar first day of spring. And we already started doing some burns. I did a burn over here, and I think you said you recently did one too, didn't you?
Yeah, we've actually, we've done 2. We've had 3 burn days already this year. We started really early in January with that first, I think it was a 70-degree day, and we got a nice private land burn done. Then it was only like a week later, we got another private land burn done. And then here in this latest warm, dry spell, we actually pulled the trigger on our largest burn unit at Hitchcock, and we covered like 800 acres that day. We had almost 30 people at Hitchcock helping us.
Holy smokes, literally. And that's pun intended, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Mine, I was just helping the neighbor do a little prescribed burn there kind of back behind my house. And so it wasn't even work related. It was a good time. It was a nice day to get out. More coming. We've got them on the calendar. So I thought we would talk today about lessons from burn planning and how that could have parallels with leadership. So we'll jump right into it. So prescribed burning is all about intentionally applying disturbance to an ecosystem, right? We do these fires because historically, at least on our landscape, but a lot of landscapes throughout the United States, they were maintained by fire. The prairies that dominated our part of the world here in Iowa were maintained by fire, whether they were set naturally or set by indigenous peoples, whatever. There was a lot of fires on the landscape, and that's kind of what maintained the prairies and kept the trees and brushy stuff at bay. And so now we come in and we intentionally apply it and use that as a management strategy. It's necessary in ecology, and if anybody's ever come to one of my talks, it's necessary in our organizations as well. Applying disturbance is what I'm talking about here. So what is that disturbance? What does that look like? Well, it could be like having the awkward conversation or taking that time to really push for clarity. And we'll dig into some of this stuff as we get into some of our points here. But, cutting out what doesn't work. We've talked about this in previous episodes of the law of subtraction and really being intentional about, hey, this isn't working. We're going to burn this thing down. And so we put these systems in place to improve and maintain culture. To improve and maintain our ecosystem at our organizations, right? And so this could be, things like one-on-one meetings with staff or ways of recognizing the team for work that they do, or conversations around our bigger why. We're gonna dig into some of these. So, Jeremy, I'll punt this back to you. What are you seeing with as far as parallels in prescribed burns and burn planning as to how it applies to organizational management?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we think about fire is that it's really an ecological driver. It's like a core principle of ecology and having a thriving natural system is that these drivers are fire, sunlight, and grazing. And so like it's really a key tenet of the ecological management. And when we started actually thinking about this, like a lot of those things that you're explaining, there's so many parallels between like your workplace ecology and the ecology on the landscape. And we really want to dig into like how burning is a driver and the ways that we actually set up and plan for that fire are really things that have a lot of parallels. between they show those parallels. And so kind of thinking about burning and like these burns that we did earlier this year, like they each of them had a clear objective. Like we had a clear reason why we were burning. And if you've listened to this before, or you think about anything to do with leadership, everything starts with why. And so I think that's the first thing that we can dig into here is the burns having clear objectives. So why were you burning with your neighbor the other day?
Yeah. And I'll ask you the same question because this is pretty early to be doing prescribed burns. So we
Oh,
had a couple objectives. So anybody that's not familiar with prescribed burning, they should always have a burn plan. And so it's, it's the strategy. And part of that burn plan is writing out the objectives. And so as I was going and putting together the burn plan for that burn we did on the neighbor's property, he just needed to burn it off because it's in Conservation Reserve Program. It's CRP, and he's required to. So every X number of years, if you have this under contract, it's a government program that the government basically pays you to stop farming it and pays you to put it into perennial native cover. So his is a bunch of Indian grass and blue stem and prairie species basically. And so it was the year to get it do the mid contract management is what it's called. And so he needed to burn it. So he called me up. He's like, "Hey, I got to burn this year. Can you help?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." But he also had a bunch of little scrub oaks coming up in it. So these little shingle oaks were coming up in it, and then it had a little bit of autumn olive coming up in there, and so he was getting some of that woody encroachment into there. And so from an ecological perspective, really what we're doing is we're burning that cover off, and that's going to hopefully burn off the tops of that woody stuff that's in there. He'll probably follow up, go in there with the brush hog now that it's all cleared. He could see where the trees are coming up, and he can blast those out of there with the brush hog after we've burned it off. Now you can see it a little bit better. But then come spring, it's going to regenerate, and it's going to come back thicker and fuller. It's hopefully going to diversify. Although doing it this early, I don't know that we're probably promoting anything other than the grasses in there. But um, it's a both a required management practice, but getting the trees out of there and then just allowing it to rejuvenate was our objectives with that one. How about yours? You said you burned all the way back in January. So the ones that you guys have done would have been your objectives.
yeah. So I think the reason why that we wanted to burn the one that we did in early January is that this is a new property that we're partnering with the management on. And so this was like, as far as we can tell, this was a first entry fire. So a first fire on purpose in modern times that we have a record of. And so it's this small area of remnant prairie that is just invaded by trees. Like we probably spent 10 or more days out there just putting in a fire break around it and cutting trees out of the prairie. And it's just invaded by cedars and honeysuckle, autumn olive. It's basic. This property basically has every invasive species that we possibly have to manage. And so because this was a first entry fire and we had this goal of trying to get rid of the trees, we wanted to burn it during the dormant season to try to like minimize impacts of the things that we don't know what's there yet. Walking through, you don't see many flowering species, but we know that they're going to come back. It's not really invaded by brome, so we didn't need to do it during the growing season. So we're just trying to really implement that ecosystem driver of fire and then set us up for cutting more trees out of it and really start that restoration process.
Yeah. So there's kind of a pre-prep process to do the other stuff. All right. How about the other burns that you've done?
Yeah, so the other ones, we had one also that was in CRP that it's just like you burn it because they tell you to, but it's also, we're burning it that time of year to burning during the dormant season. We're still going to have the ability to cycle those nutrients and possibly promote some of the flowering species that were there. It's really invaded or it's very heavy in Indian grass, big blue stem, that sort of thing. And he's been on a really great burn schedule to just get it burned every 3 years. And so there weren't many trees coming in. It had like almost a bomb proof fire break because he actually mows it every year.
Oh, nice.
He's got 25 acres and he's very proud that he mows like 3 acres. So it's a pretty bomb-proof, trail system there. And, again, just implementing that ecological driver of fire and just implementing it at a time it's not going to hurt anything and it could promote some of um flowering species. And then this latest burn that we did at Hitchcock, we were basically burning all of the oak timber that we have at Hitchcock. And we usually like to do that in the fall, but we just didn't have the burn day to do it
Mm,
in the fall. It just didn't meet any of the criteria. Like we couldn't have lit the oak leaf litter on fire if we wanted to until we
yeah.
got this hot, dry spell. And really that we're trying to use annual fire to make it super patchy and trying to again just implement this ecological driver of fire and trying to do it on a scale that's going to have these areas that are burned, unburned, and burned a little bit, and really just try to manage for as many things as we can across the landscape.
Yeah. So that was a timber burn, which is very, very different than a CRP or a grass fire. And so you said that I remember when we were texting earlier that you said the conditions were pretty intense. Which, if anybody does timber burns, you do need a little bit drier conditions, and your prescription can expand into some drier and hotter and higher winds in timber because your fuel loading isn't a fraction of what it is, say, in grassy areas. But nevertheless, that still means it can get pretty intense. But yeah, you're talking 800 acres, but you had 30 people.
Right. Yeah, and so we had one area that we actually did have first entry fire as well. We got to move the line down next to the neighbor's house, and that area did burn pretty hot. But it's
Mm,
something that we would, expect from that much of fuel loading and things like that. And I think it's of note that when we're thinking about oak timber fire, when I say hot or I say that it was fairly intense, like that's still only like 1 or 2 foot flame lengths.
yeah,
Like where it's not the like Western forest fire where the whole forest is burning. Like it's just on the ground level and just the oak leaf litter is burning. And so that was a pretty hot burn. We got to just spread people out in 3 different divisions. We had the 30 people spread out, and it was just a great burn day. And then part of that as well is that we actually, a couple days later, had a day that was like even more intense conditions. The wind was higher, the relative humidity was lower. And so we had these slopes that didn't burn on that burn day that we really wanted to get burned. And we put out kind of the press release that said, like, hey, we're going to burn this day. And because it was so early and so hot and dry, the National Weather Service had put out like alerts. It wasn't a red flag day, but they were just saying like, "Hey, it is hot and dry. We're in drought conditions. Like if a fire starts burning, it's going to burn pretty intensely and
it's
be hard to
gonna go
put out."
nuts.
Right.
Yeah,
Like I think it was important that we had to think about like the nuance of where we were putting fire that day too.
yeah, yeah. Because when the National Weather Service puts out a burn warning or a fire danger alert, they're thinking about the open fields, which
Right.
is the majority of our landscape here. And I mean, you've seen I drove up to Ames the other day to give a talk up at the Shade Tree Short Course. And like, there's pieces of highway that are just burned all over the place. Somebody flicked a cigarette or what happened, but the side of the highway is burned up. And you see, even like just some brome grass stuff managed to get a fire. I've seen some people's yards had black in it. The ditch caught on fire and it burned up into their yard a little bit. So that's what they're worried about. It's a very different situation than timber, especially like where you guys are at, where you're just kind of completely surrounded by these hills and you've got a number of ways to control it, or you can fall back to the next valley. And
Right.
so I guess that takes us to our first point here, is that these burns always have clear objectives. Like we don't go out to set a fire just for the sake of setting a fire. Although sometimes that is done, and that's not the way it should be. And so you've always got a reason, and that reason influences what you burn, when you do it, and in what conditions. So like in your case, burning those timbers, if those were really overgrown with honeysuckle, you'd have really wanted to focus on that fall burn window to try to catch that honeysuckle when it was still green and
Right.
beat it back. And the spring burn will still do some because you're gonna torch those stems, but I think you're gonna have much greater effect. And so that's our situation, is that a lot of the timber burns that we do, we're fighting off bush honeysuckle, which is an invasive species. It was planted many years ago.
People told us to plant it for a while and then we're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, it doesn't stay there and birds like
Right.
to spread it
Shit.
everywhere." And
Yeah, it just takes over. And so, we really try to focus on those fall burns, but we're in the same boat you are. We didn't have crap for a burn window in fall. And so we didn't get a fraction of the burns done that we wanted to do. And so, but now we're in the situation. See, we don't have the human infrastructure like you do. So we're in the middle of projects and getting ready for spring park opening. And, we're doing our shop projects. We're getting all this stuff done that we've got to do in February and going into March. We'll be opening parks in March and first part of April. It's hard for us to even find time to squeeze in burns right now, even though I wish we could. And so, that gets back to, what's the reason that you're doing this? And then the same thing is going to apply in our organization. So just doing something for the sake of doing it is just like burning an area because it looks like it'll carry a fire. Like, oh yeah, I think I'll torch this. You see this all the time. Like the landowners go out and they burn the ditch and all they're doing is just lighting fire for the sake of lighting fire, rejuvenate it a little bit, but there's like not a real ecological reason there. And so this is the question we have to ask ourselves as leaders, as people in our organizations is why this, why now? And if we can't answer that, we need to be skeptical whether or not this thing that we're considering is worth our time. And the test for that, I think, is being clear on your why, being clear on what it is you want to accomplish as an organization and what you want your organization to operate like. What's the way your organization is going to be like for the people there and for the people that you serve? And so some examples I would throw out here is, I know a lot of organizations do performance evaluations. You and I had this discussion a while back. You guys don't really have a formal evaluation process. Some organizations do. We have one, but this is one of those things that I question, okay, is the way we're doing this really serving us? Like, what's the objective with doing this? Is it just to check a box because HR tells us we need to do this? Like, if that's the case, then why are we dedicating our time and resources to doing this when potentially there's a better way? Like, if we have to check the box, let's at least do it in such a way that accomplishes something for our organization, that builds culture. And so if you go back and listen to the episode where I think it's something called like culture building through performance evaluations. Go back and listen to that. We kind of riff on this. In past episodes, we've talked about staff meetings and just this talk I gave up at Shade Tree Short Course. This is one of the things I talked about after we learned about working genius, and we've talked about the 6 types of working genius a whole bunch on this podcast. I learned that my staff were not the type of people that really liked brainstorming sessions, despite the fact that you and I are. And,
Right.
Like we love a good whiteboard session, but the rest of my team, most of them do not. And so to sit in a staff meeting every month and go through a whiteboard session of, okay, what's our goals for this month? That was draining on them. And it was sapping their energy, and it was taking them away from time that they could be spent doing something that they're more suited to do. So we threw them out. We stopped doing the monthly staff meeting, and we restructured our meetings altogether. This could also go for certain environmental education programs. Like, I know a lot of organizations out there, you've got these programs that you do, and you've been doing these for a long time. Have you ever questioned, are these still meeting the objectives that we want to meet? Whether that's through curriculum, whether it's through attendance count, whether it's through impact on the participants, whatever it is. And it's just constantly asking the question, like, okay, what are our objectives, and is what we're doing meeting those?
Yeah, so I think that once we step back and anything that we're doing, we're asking why and why this and why now. I think the next step is to share that why as well. So back to this last prescribed burn that we did where we were burning under there was information out there that it's a little bit more intense conditions. We actually had some people asking, and they commented on Facebook, they're like, well, why today? I hope that you canceled it. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? And so if you don't have a strong why, you're not going to have something to fall back on to really explain why you made that decision. And this is true of anything that we do. Anything that we do should be tied back to our why. And so between our team and between our kind of community engagement people, we put together this Facebook post that basically explained exactly all of the decisions and all the why that went into that decision to burn that day. And at least by our kind of Facebook and Instagram standards, it basically went viral. We ended up getting, let me look it up here. So on our Instagram page, we normally get, 20, 30 likes, something like that. We had almost 500 likes on that post. And between Facebook and Instagram, it got almost 30 comments. And, that might not seem like a whole lot to a lot of people, but that's basically viral for our page. And
Right.
almost every single one of them was just positive, and it was like, "Well, thank you very much for, explaining that why," and that totally makes sense why you actually decided to burn that day.
Wow. Look at that. Maybe there's hope for humanity after all.
Right.
But no, you're absolutely right, because it's a perfect example. And let's tie this back to organizations. How many times in organizations do the frontline people question, why the hell are we doing this? Like, why is the head office, or why is the boss, or why is the organization saying we got to do this, and or why are we doing this now? And I've run into this with my team. Is, I'll show up and be like, hey guys, I think we need to go do whatever this thing is, right? And they'll go do it, and then it would be after the fact that, they'd be like, why are we doing this now, when that's something we could have done later? And so it's this is the tough thing, and this is often, I feel like, where things break down in organizations, is that there's this there's this concept that we have in this country, and across the world, of like, you just blindly follow what the boss says. It's just like, oh, okay, fine. I don't agree with it, but I'll go do it because that's what I'm told to do. And I have tried, and I encourage organizations every time I do a talk. I encourage organizations. How do you build a system where people can question that on the spot? Like, if this was a prescribed burn and somebody didn't agree with what was in the burn plan, and like, I I'm not sure if that's going to work, or I'm not sure if this is the best way to do that, you would expect them to speak up. Like there's a reason you review the burn plan ahead of time. And I would hope that everyone on that fire line would have an opportunity to say, hey, I got a concern about this little spot right here, or why would we do this now? And that was a situation that you ran into with the public on your Facebook page. Is like, okay, the National Weather Service is saying there's some pretty high fire danger today. Why in the hell are you doing a burn? And then it gets back to, okay, let's explain this, and taking a little bit of time. And you got to do that with your teams too. It is taking that time to explain it, and give the opportunity to ask those questions to gain that clarity, because lack of clarity just kills big time.
Yeah, exactly. I think that like one of the things that I think about a lot with having prescribed burning as a part of our program is that it forces us to be what's called a high reliability organization. And a key tenet of that high reliability is that you have this preoccupation with failure. And so basically you're constantly questioning each piece of this puzzle that could lead to failure, because when you're applying a prescribed fire on the landscape, like, failing in that can be absolutely huge. Like,
Yeah.
it can be millions of dollars of damage. It can be literally someone's life within this operation. And so it forces us to be this high reliability organization that has the preoccupation with failure, and you're constantly asking questions and then relating that back to why. And so I think that it's an important point here that in our burn planning, we have to try to think out as many things as we can beforehand, have someone that has the opportunity to look at that has an outside view, and then allow them to have those questions so that we can try to implement that plan as well as possible.
Yeah, which takes us to another point that I wanted to make. So in burn plans, those burn plans always have contingencies, and it's really easy to sit and write the burn plan and say, okay, here's the fire breaks, and here's the expected wind direction. So we're going to start downwind. We're going to light our fire down here, and we're going to work up this side of the burn unit. We're going to work up that side of the burn unit. We're going to work into the wind until we get the backfires and the flank fires. So those are the fires that run parallel with the wind, and the backfires downwind. Once that's done, we'll come around, we'll light the head fire, and it'll all come together in one big circle. That's great, but what happens when the fire jumps? Like, okay, what happens if that fire gets outside of these fire breaks? Then what? Or, if the fire gets over into here, where's the next spot that we're going to drop back to? Do we have a secondary fire break? Do we have a valley that we can fall back into and light off of a creek? Because, and at least in our burn plans anyway, we talk about spot fires, and if a fire jumps out, and you get a little ember that starts somewhere outside of the area that you're trying to burn, the burn plan says, we'll dedicate all the resources available to attack the spot fire. But if that ends up as such a situation where it's not just something you can go spray out or stomp out real quick, then what do you do? And I've heard them called pre-mortems. And so this could apply to anything, whether it's a fire, whether it's a school program that you're going to be doing through your organization, whether it's a big construction project, whatever it is, it's taking the time to sit there and asking, okay, how many different ways can this go sideways? Like what happens when this happens? And you start poking holes in your plan. And you just ask yourself, how many different ways could this go off the rails? And if it does, what do we do?
Exactly. It like you have to plan for these things, these what ifs. Like burn planning a lot of times can actually be like sitting back and it's kind of like this ultimate what if scenario. So we actually had on that first fire that we did, or the second one that we did this year, we did have a little spot fire. And it's in an area that has a bunch of development. And so it's basically these little pockets of remnant prairie that have just development on all the hillsides, and there's a house there, a house there, a house there, a house there. And so there's really, when you start running through those scenarios, like if something were to get outside of that box, that box that you talked about drawing, that we start on the downwind side and draw this box around it. If something's going to get outside of that box, there was really only one option for us to go, and that would be go direct. And so we would go to the fire and put it out with the equipment that we have on hand. There was really no option to fall back to a different line, because where the spot fire was connected fuel all the way up to someone's backyard, to someone's house. And so like it forces you to be constantly aware of your surroundings and constantly like aware of the what ifs of what could happen. So on this one, we were doing a little bit of extra lighting on the inside, and that actually made a little spot fire jump. And it had this little uphill push of wind. And I was on the other line and I was like, this just feels like something could happen. And so like I just drove up there and I'm like, holy cow, something did happen. This
Some good
jumped
instincts
out.
there.
And so like you're setting these contingencies, and then also like beforehand in the burn planning process, like knowing that there was nothing else to fall back to, it forces you to be more reactive to the what ifs on the day.
Yeah. And some might say, so as this would apply to our organizations and not a fire, some might say, well, this feels an awful lot like being pessimistic and sitting there and talking about all the different ways it could go wrong. And there's a huge difference between being pessimistic and preparing and just planning for contingencies. And so that would be the pushback I'd have on that. The pessimism to me would be the expectation that it's going to go wrong. Whereas contingency planning is simply sitting there and trying to imagine all the different ways it could go wrong and then being ready to address them for if and when they do, so that you can maintain the optimism that you will succeed in whatever the mission happens to be. And so let's use some
I would
actual examples.
actually add there too that this pessimism is like an idea that this is going to lead to failure. At least in this like burn world and burn scenario, and that it can apply to our organizations as well, is that if you have a plan for the contingencies, having that plan is how you get to success. It's not like the what if
Right.
of failure or constantly being worried that this is going to lead to failure. It is a whole part of the mission that is going to ultimately help you achieve success.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just like the military guys say, no plan ever withstands the first contact with the enemy. It always goes off the rails. But so a perfect example, like you just said, you saw what this fire was doing and your instinct kicked in and you're like, this just feels like this could go off the rails. I bet some of that comes from all the time you guys have spent doing contingency planning and talking about and doing postmortems of, here's the fire behavior that we saw, and that's what resulted in spot fires that we've had in the past. And now you're seeing the same kind of thing. And you're like, this really looks like this is the type of thing that could send a spot fire out. And so it develops those instincts a little bit. And yes, you cannot plan for every contingency there is, because that's the other pushback I'll get. Well, you can't plan for everything.
Right.
Well, no, of course you can't. But you can plan enough to at least have some sort of strategy in place. So like in your instance, I'm sure you guys asked the question, okay, if we do get a spot fire and we have no choice but to go and do a direct attack on it, what equipment and personnel are we going to need to be effective enough to launch a direct attack on something that's burning on a hill that, you potentially can't get a machine to and that kind of stuff. That approach is very different than, well, we can just take the side-by-side up to this next mode area and just light a backfire right there. Like The resource needs for those two situations are vastly different.
Exactly, and you said it exactly there. That was exactly what was in my mind was the resource needs, and so, like, we look at this whole scenario, and we say that, like, "Okay, we could get it done with, 6 people," but then you start planning for the what ifs, and what if something gets out of the box? What are we gonna need to take care of that? And so we actually had 8 people there that day,
Yeah.
and so even though the probability of risk or the a thing that we say is the probability of ignition, and so, like, that day, if you do all those calculations, it was relatively low, but it's still not 0. And so you still have to be able to plan for the possibility of something happening, and you can have a better plan going into it, which may include just having a few more people.
Yeah. And so I'll draw some parallels with some actual stuff that's not fire related. So let's say, for instance, you're part of an organization and you've got a personnel issue where, so let's say you've got an underperformer that's weighing down the team. All right. And you see it. And this is where you've got to have some sort of plan of action in place. Now, there's any number of ways that this could go about, and it's gonna depend on the person, and it's gonna depend on the situation. But it's not something that you can just sit back and ignore, because the best organizations make sure that people have the right and the privilege to work with other high performers. And so you as a leader are going to have to address this issue. So what does that look like? And if you can think about this ahead of time, uh, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier than just being reactive and going into it and seeing this thing and then just going in blind. Because what you're going to do is you're going to default to your previous experience, if you've got any, or you're going to default to some of the training that you've had. And oftentimes, especially if you're early in your leadership journey, this might be nothing more than, say, the supervisory class that you got put in when you moved from frontline employee to site manager. And that mentality is very, very different than being a leader. Like this, we've talked about this before. Being a manager is very different than being a leader. And so taking the time to think about that. And then when you do get ready to have that conversation, so the performance conversation has to happen, you've got to be thinking about, okay, here's my plan going into it. Here's what I'm going to say. And then that could go off the rails in a hurry. It might just go fine, but it might not. So what is your plan for if and when it doesn't? And if this thing goes completely off the rails and you haven't even considered it and it takes you by surprise, we're just human. And sometimes what'll happen is we dig in and then that's never good. And so if this allows you to, I'll tie back to burn planning again. It allows you to set a prescription. And so you can go through this mental exercise and, like, okay, if this conversation, if I feel like it's going off the rails and it's not getting anywhere and it's getting too emotional or it's getting too heated, that's going to put it out of prescription and I'm shutting this fire down. And, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, this conversation isn't working right now. We're going to put a pause on this and we're going to circle back around to this, and you can set that time and date whenever that is. But having gone through that contingency planning in advance is going to put you in a much stronger position as a leader than you would be if you just went into such a thing blindly. And the same thing would apply to any project or whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, in the so you just talked about, like, if this gets to a point where, like, there's this trigger point that happens that, like, we need to shut down this fire, we need to shut down this conversation, or on the front end, you have to think about, is this the time, is this the place to have this conversation? These are the
Right.
two hardest decisions that can be made in the fire world, is to say no. So you go through this, like, go, no go checklist, and to get on that day when we were burning Hitchcock, we had 30 people there. We had all of these partners there. We're a 3-person organization. We had 27 other people that had taken time out of their day to come and help us. If we had gotten to this point where we're just like, you know what? Today's not the day, but we already have all these people here, so we're just going to try it. Like, that's not a wise decision to make. And so
Right.
even if you're having this conversation with someone, these may feel like the success or failure is so much bigger. It's such a easier decision to say no in the fire world because of all of these, like, things that could happen. It may feel like the failure is so much bigger, But from the fire world, it's the hardest decision to make to say no when you have all that pressure. Or if you've already got the fire going and you've got fire on the ground and you're like, man, we're just not quite meeting our ecological objectives, or this fire just isn't burning quite how I want it to. And again, you're even farther into that process of
Yeah.
getting all those people there working and then to shut it down. Like that's a very difficult decision when we have all these things on the line, but you have to be willing to make that decision, and you have to be willing to make that decision in any of these scenarios that you might find yourself as a leader.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's fire, whether it's a personnel issue, whether it's a project. I mean, good God, we could spend episode on episode going over all the different ways projects can go off the rails and the different things like that. I mean, we're all familiar with, if anybody works in doing public programs, the weather screwing up your program or event. And I know a lot of us in this line of work, we know what it's like to do contingency planning for, if if the weather turns bad, how are we going to move inside? And so we're keen to do that, but we often don't do it with some of the more kind of mundane operations. And I really feel that the best leaders do. They take that time to be intentional and plan out for the different ways that things can go wrong or go sideways, and have an idea in mind of what they're going to do then, because it puts them, it allows you then to adjust rather than react.
Right.
And so I guess that takes us to the last point I wanted to make, is that burn plans are plans, but they're flexible. They really provide you a baseline, right? They lay out, here's the prescriptions, and some of this stuff has to be met, but a lot of times you're making adjustments based on the conditions that day. So like on this burn that I did on my neighbors here just a week or two ago, the burn plan called for a straight south wind, because at the time it was a week or so ahead of the burn that I was updating this thing. That was what the forecast called for, was it's going to be straight south. On the day of, it was kind of a southwesterly wind. But the burn plan said, here's the different winds that you can burn on. You just have to adjust your ignition sequence, the where you start in the field or whatever. And that's common in burn plans. And you just adjust based on conditions either at the start or how things change throughout the course of our burns. And the same thing applies in our organizations, is we can develop policies and systems, but we got to realize that our organizations are ultimately collections of people, and people are not machines, and they're computer that you can just program and expect to execute line by line. People are kind of be messy, right? Unpredictable sometimes, and they could be different from one day or one season to the other, or season of life to the other, and you just have to adjust. Like, so this is a perfect segue into the big announcement we have here at the Parks and Restoration Podcast. Your season of life is about to be very, very different than what it has been for quite some time. So you want to drop that bomb on everybody?
Life is about to change. So March 20th, my wife and I are having a baby.
Yay!
Woo!
Yeah. So right at springtime. So
exactly.
So yeah, so your season of life is about to be very, very different. The guy that was always there and was always willing to put in the overtime and work the weekends when the spring burn season hit, that's about to change.
Exactly.
And
so many things are about to change. And one of the things that I decided I'm going to have to pull back on for a little while is podcasting with my best friend, Chris. So for a little while here, we have some plans in place so that Chris is going to continue to do some great interviews. He's got some great meetups. He's basically just going to revert back to what he knows on interviewing people and put a plan in place and continue the podcast.
Yeah. And I'll be checking in with you, but yeah, we're going to lose our co-host for a little while. And that brings me to the point that I'm making here, is that people are going to be in different seasons of life. So I have a guy on my team that just had a baby here like 3 days ago. And so, his season of life, his situation in life is very, very different than it was even just 4 weeks ago. Right. And so that's the thing that we have to recognize as leaders, is that for this spring, going into burn season, going into getting the parks ready, it's going to be different for my organization, for your organization, because we've got people that their priorities are going to be different. Like if wife calls and says, hey, kid's sick, we got to get to the doctor, that's what you're doing. And right. that is the priority, and it absolutely should be. And, when you come back to work and you're a little bleary eyed because you haven't slept, Well, that's to be expected, right? That's not
Right.
what we can't do is just blindly do what we've done and expect these people in different seasons of life to just be the same that they were. Like, oh, you got a 3-week-old baby? Well, what do you mean you're not operating at 100%? Like,
Right.
what do you mean you're not volunteering for overtime? Like, what do you mean you need more time off, or maybe, you're not quite on your game because you haven't slept in weeks. Yeah, that's how it goes. And
Yeah,
that's just, it's a natural way of things.
and to kind of tie everything together here, I think all these key points that we've talked about today is that I have a lot of trust in the team that we have at Pot County because I know that our organization, we lead with why, we make plans, and we plan for contingencies. To tie these points together, I have a lot of trust in that everything is going to keep going without me for a little while. Just like this podcast, we lead with why too. Everything's going to keep going, and have some really awesome episodes coming up.
That is a great one to end on, is that really what you said right there. It's about building trust in your organization. When you look at running your organization and bringing these points that we've made of having contingencies, being flexible, understanding the why and the purpose for what it is that you're doing, it builds trust among your team. And so, like, just like you said, you can walk away for a little while and you know that things are going to be just fine without you. And they'll probably be fine here in the podcast. I can't make that promise, but they'll probably be all right. But
You haven't fired me yet, so I'm still the co-host, so I can promise it's going to be great.
Right. So, but anyway, that's a good one to end on. Leadership lessons from prescribed burn and burn plans. I hope this lent some insight to you, whether you are a prescribed burn practitioner or not. The lessons still apply no matter what you do or what role you hold in your organization. Because frankly, even if you're not the top person, a lot of this stuff still applies because you're still working with people. You still have people around you that you're working with, and all of these things still apply wherever you're at in an organization, because ecosystems, just like organizations, everything is interrelated. So with that, I think we will go ahead and wrap this up. If you're not already and you would like to be, please join our next level leadership community. And to do that, the easy way is to just go to parksandrestoration.com, name an email, and you'll get emails from me every now and then. They're irregular because I have a hard time keeping a steady schedule. But when I've got some insights to share on this leadership through the lens of ecology stuff, or we've got upcoming meetups like what we have on the calendar right now with a couple of really interesting people, Zoom meetings that we invite you to. It's just a great opportunity to be part of a community of folks that are improving their leadership. So sign up, parksandrestoration.com, and you can join that community.
And don't forget to find us on Facebook and Instagram. I am going to still keep posting our episodes on there, and some cool information to be found there. Everything directs you back to the website. Make sure that you sign up for that next level leader. That's the best way to stay connected.
Absolutely. And for Jeremy's last time for a little while, this has been the Parks and Restoration Podcast, the show for parks and conservation folks that want to be better leaders for their communities, for future generations, and for the agencies and the people that they serve. Thank you all for what you do, and we will talk to you again in a couple weeks. Take care.